All right, so obviously, largely the same assignment, so I will go kind of quickly through the beginning. This is a tangent a little bit. These are some designs that are obviously not related to any prosthetics, but I would just like to thank Kent for like the skills that we gained at the beginning of the program as well as on this assignment to like really get familiar with CAD and the prototyping process. So on the left are some designs that I made, just paper prototype. They didn't go any further. For an office chair you could sit in cross-legged, and then the right is a reverse engineered cassette tape. So moving right along to the project at hand, this is a different view of the same patient, obviously. Once again, that's Mr. K, a double or actually quadruple amputee who has a mid-metacarpal amputation on his right hand, and that's the hand that we're fitting our eating device to. If you look at the top right, that's the current device that he's eating with. It covers his upper arm and then over what's left of his hand, and utensils are slotted into that green bar. So the feedback that we were given via proxy about that device is that he found it to be generally comfortable and generally operational, but was super concerned about the durability. So throughout the entire design process, the primary focus for my design was something that would hold up over time. So moving on, before I got to any designing or even particularly sketching and brainstorming, it was time to do a lot of research. I went down quite a patent rabbit hole in both US patents and some German patents, which is what you see if you can see my cursor here on the right. I found the same palm-based products that Changpei found, and then also some 3D printed palm, like across the palm designs. So when I got to sketching, I also found that across the palm wasn't super comfortable. So I ended up sketching something like 10 to 15 different orientations that you could possibly hold a utensil at. I found that every lunch break for like the past 6 weeks, I've been trying to strategically choose what food I'm going to eat to like figure out how I hold forks and spoons. So that was an interesting tangent that came out of this project for sure. I don't really eat food without paying attention to it anymore. But anyway, back to the actual design process. Despite the fact that I found across the palm to be not the most comfortable orientation, there were so many products and designs from like medical professionals that used it that I had to make my first prototype use it anyway, just to see what all the hype was about. So on the left is my first paper prototype. It looks a little bit loose there. I tightened it up so I could actually use it for testing later. And sure enough, as you've heard and as I thought I found when I was trying to hold it that way as a preliminary test, it's actually super uncomfortable. Especially eating with spoons, it's really hard to scoop up food with this like palmar orientation. So I'm not entirely sure why it's so common in the industry. It remains a mystery to me. I could not find anything that really describes why. It is a particularly durable orientation, but that's something that you can definitely get around in other orientations as long as you're cognizant of keeping your, as Changpei was talking about in more detail, keeping your forces balanced and so on and so forth. So what I was first focusing on was trying to give a little bit of just extra feature and extra autonomy to our patient. It's obviously what we're trying to provide while designing this device is providing him some autonomy back that he no longer has. So initially I came up with this idea to twist the utensil a little bit. I found that when I eat, I actually rotate my fork or spoon just a little so that you don't have to line it up quite so well with what you're eating, which you obviously can't do with a rigid device. I learned very quickly that that is far outside the scope of my abilities in this short program, and also that when you only have loose and kind of stretchy string like yarn and thread, that it's incredibly difficult to prototype something that's tension-based. So moving on from that, I settled upon the front of the hand design facing inwards. As you heard before, and we'll see again with Ryan, this is a lot more natural to how you hold a spoon or fork, and generally more comfortable to eat with as well, with something that's added onto your hand. So this works pretty well, and we get on to my second, perhaps overcomplicated feature, which is the removable carriages. So my idea was that Our patient, Mr. K, would be able to switch utensils mid-meal without help by using swappable carriages that fit onto the end of this device and a holder that I would provide that he could slide them off and onto. I prototyped this successfully. It worked very well. Alex and Lena, you saw that kind of. And so I was really excited about that, and I actually really liked this design. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure where to go from there, but I knew I had to prototype at least one more to kind of make sure that this is what I wanted to work with. So enter my third prototype. This is based on this German patent that I found back in the depths of my research. And what this is trying to do is be a bit more natural because it's mounted on the palm of the user's hand as opposed to an attachment that sticks out on the end, which feels a lot more connected to a person's autonomy when you're eating with it. And this actually worked really well. I found that the angle that I added was super successful. The only reason I decided to go back to the end-mounted design when moving forward was I was concerned that there was not enough palm space on Mr. K in particular to be able to mount this securely without having to compromise wrist mobility. So ultimately, I decided to go with the second, more or less, prototype. I decided to hold off on the swappable carriage for now, given the scope of the program. It's still in the back of my mind, especially because my prototype worked so well, perhaps as like a future development once I have something that I know works flawlessly. So before I got to catting, there are a lot of forks and spoons. And in my house, we don't really have forks and spoons that are just nice, comfortable, straight lines like you saw with Changpei. So I had to find a way to accommodate everything that looked like this. So these are 13 different utensils that I found digging around in my house, and they're all super different. The width, front to back on the handles, from the smallest to the largest, changed by a factor of 100. So it's impressively difficult to accommodate all different utensils. So what I came up with is this sort of box model. There's a top and bottom plate to hold onto the hand, which I later decided which one of those I will keep, and more on that in a minute. There was a box that is half attached to the main plate, which is the top plate, which has foam on the inside of it to try and accommodate multiple different utensil sizes, and then there's a lid that clips on. I also used the bag clip idea. I have one here. These are made of a much more flexible plastic than 3D printable plastic I found. So after testing this iteration, I also stepped away from the clips for durability reasons. Now I live across the country, so I've only gotten one printed version so far, but here it is. It worked well. I found that because I have to spend so long waiting for my prototypes, I have to put a lot of mental effort into ensuring that they'll work as well as I think they're going to before I send them off to print. And so this did work pretty well. I actually ate with this spoon in this orientation, and it was successful. I did find when eating with a fork, especially on more rigid materials, that it would slide up into the device a little bit. So that's something that I have fixed, hopefully, moving forward. I haven't tested my second design iteration yet. But yeah, so I decided to get rid of the bottom plate, which means that I am using something that mounts on the top of the hand instead of the palm side. So the opposite decision to Changpei, because I found that this was particularly stable and that the Velcro worked pretty successfully in this orientation. I'm not entirely positive that it'll fit on Mr. K's hand, and of course my hands are a little bit smaller than his, but I did, because of the symmetry of this top plate, turn it upside down and try and mount it on the back of my hand, which is what he has left, and it was impressively stable. So on to my design changes. I tried to streamline this, especially with the feedback from Caitlin. Hearing about trying to make designs that are not only useful, but also aesthetically pleasing and durable was a huge eye-opener to me. And even though it's not particularly an artistic device, I do think that alternate feedback was super helpful in the long run for me figuring out how I wanted to continue to develop and make this a little bit more just sturdy and also less like a box on an L-shaped piece of plastic. So I also worked to improve utensil fit. I went through all 13 utensils that I have in my house. Well, I have more than 13, but all 13 types of utensils that I have in my house, and measured how they fit relative to my device, and used that feedback to improve the inside of the box fit, which you can see has been changed a bit here. And I also changed the lid attachment method. So I'm now using these small neodymium magnets. They're super tiny, they're this big. And they're going to slot inside the lid and also the main body of the design to hold it together in a much more durable way than a clip that's going to have to be stressed every time a utensil is changed. So this will make it a lot more user-friendly. It's just something that you have to snap together and it easily works, as well as something that'll be a lot stronger and will hold up much better in the long run. Here's a rendering of that and what it should look like once it's printed. I've decided just on one Velcro strap that goes around the hand for now, since that seemed to be adequately securable. I asked a lot of people and everyone had different opinions about how much Velcro you should use, if you need to add a wrist support, if you need to add a bottom plate. And so everyone has different opinions on how much stability prosthetics need. But in my testing, I do think that just one Velcro strap will be sufficient with only the top plate. Of course, once again, if we ever get to interface with the patient, that'll be an important question to ask. One thing I also tested with this version, which is not pictured, is adding foam along the edge of the top plate to make it just a little bit more comfortable, since that's the primary region where it actually makes close contact with the user's hand. And it improved like my knuckle area, which would be just the end of Mr. K's hand, significantly. So what are my next steps? I am going to continue to develop for whatever utensils that I have, but especially because I have such strange utensils, and because if you look on the internet, there are always weird outliers with particularly thick handles or so on or so forth, that I can't entirely guarantee that any device will work with Mr. K's utensils unless I provide them. So what I intend to do is purchase a small set of utensils that I will optimize my design to ensure that he will have something that functions properly when I can give him the design. And then I also have to ensure that the magnetic closing works well and holds up durably. My magnets are only glued into the plastic, but the force is going into the design as opposed to away from it, which should add to the durability. But one thing that I do have a question about is how thick that plastic structure holding it inside the design can be without compromising the structural integrity, but also ensuring that the magnets don't just pull through after extended use. So hopefully we can get some feedback on these from Mr. K. I'm just going to go back so you can actually look at the design I'm talking about. It's obviously very hard to test because your hand shape is fundamentally different if it's mounted on the front as opposed to the back. And going only off some simple ruler measurements has been impressively challenging. So it would be great to be able to develop that, and I'm looking forward to having more printed versions that I can test in this extended time frame in the future. So that's everything. Thank you very much.